You are not still explaining because you have not found the right words. You are still explaining because some part of you believes the right words could finally change the ending. You rewrite the message. You soften the first sentence. You remove the part that sounds angry. You add the detail they always pretend not to remember. You make it shorter, then longer, then gentler. You try to sound calm enough that they cannot accuse you of being emotional. You try to sound wounded enough that they finally understand the damage. You try to make your pain impossible to misinterpret. And still, somehow, they miss the point. They respond to one word. They question your tone. They explain what they meant. They tell you what you should have understood. They make the conversation about your reaction instead of what caused it. So you begin again, not because you enjoy repeating yourself, because somewhere inside you, the conversation still feels unfinished. Because being misunderstood does not feel like a disagreement to you. It feels like abandonment. You are not looking for another argument. You are looking for the moment they finally turn toward you and say, "I see what this did to you." You are looking for the response that would make the last 10 years make sense. You are looking for proof that you were never asking for too much. But the cruelest part is this. You may be explaining yourself to someone who benefits from never understanding you. And your nervous system may still believe that one perfect sentence can make them care. That is where the pattern begins. You know the moment. The room is quiet. But your body is not. Your phone is in your hand, the screen bright against the dark, and the message has already been rewritten 6 times. You are not trying to win. You are trying to be fair. You are trying to make the truth clear enough that it cannot be twisted into something else. You include context because context matters to you. You explain why the comment hurt, why the silence felt punishing, why the broken promise was not small, why the pattern matters more than the single event. You anticipate their defense before they make it. You remove anything they could use to dismiss you. You make your pain easier for them to digest. Then the reply arrives. They answer the least important part. Or they disappear. Or they tell you that you are overthinking. Or they say they cannot deal with this right now. And you are left with a strange mixture of grief and urgency, because the conversation did not resolve anything. It only created another layer you now feel compelled to explain. The more unheard you feel, the more precise you become. The more they minimize, the more evidence you gather. Most people call this overthinking. Psychology calls it something more specific. Leon Festinger named cognitive dissonance, the distress that appears when two realities cannot comfortably exist together. In plain English, your mind is trying to reconcile the person you believe they could be with the person they keep showing you they are. You are not only explaining the event, you are trying to preserve the relationship between your hope and the evidence. That is why one conversation becomes 12. That is why you keep returning to the same wound from a different angle. That is why their lack of understanding feels almost impossible to leave alone. This is not neediness. This is a mind trying to restore coherence after repeated emotional contradiction. You tell yourself that you are only asking for basic accountability, and often you are. But beneath that request is a deeper one. You are asking them to confirm that your perception is trustworthy. You are asking them to tell you that the pain was real, the pattern was real, and you were not foolish for noticing it. That is why the argument is never only about the argument. It is about reality. It is about whether your version of the relationship is allowed to exist in the room. You remember the details because your body remembers them. The shift in their voice, the way they became warm again the moment you stopped pressing the issue, the way affection returned after you apologized for being hurt, the way every attempt to get clarity somehow ended with you comforting the person who caused the confusion. You became fluent in their discomfort. You learned how far you could push before they shut down. You learned when to stop crying. You learned when to make your pain sound smaller. You learned how to translate your own emotional experience into a version that would not scare them away. And every time you did that, you abandoned a little more of yourself while believing you were saving the connection. But here is what I have not told you yet. The need to explain is often older than the relationship. It can begin long before you ever learn the language of attachment. It can begin in a home where your feelings were only accepted when they were reasonable, quiet, convenient, or easy to solve. It can begin when the adults around you had no room for your emotional reality unless you presented it correctly. Maybe you learned that tears made someone impatient. Maybe anger made the room unsafe. Maybe asking for comfort created guilt. Maybe you had to give a complete defense before anyone took your hurt seriously. A child in that environment does not stop having feelings. A child becomes a lawyer for their own pain. They gather evidence. They anticipate objections. They learn to present the case carefully because emotional survival depends on being believed. That strategy made sense then. It helped you keep connection with people you could not afford to lose. But an old survival strategy can become an adult prison. Now, when someone dismisses your pain, your nervous system does not register one disappointing conversation. It registers an emergency. The child who once needed the adult to understand becomes the adult who cannot stop writing paragraphs to someone committed to misunderstanding them. This is not weakness. This is adaptation that never received an ending. Attachment theory, developed through the work of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, describes how early relational experiences shape what your nervous system expects from closeness. In plain English, your body learns whether love will be responsive, unpredictable, distant, or conditional. If care was inconsistent, your system may have learned that connection must be earned through careful monitoring and emotional labor. So you do not merely speak. You manage the entire emotional environment around the conversation. You choose the right time. You lower your voice. You explain their side before they have to. You reassure them that you are not attacking them. You make your pain safe for the person who caused it. That is the mirror nobody warns you about. You became so skilled at understanding them that they never had to become skilled at understanding you. And because you are thoughtful, you keep mistaking your capacity for mutuality. You assume that if you can hold complexity, they can too. You assume that if you explain the history, the pattern, the tenderness underneath the anger, they will meet you there. You keep offering depth to someone who may only use depth as a place to hide. Understanding is not the same as accountability. A person can understand your words and still refuse the meaning. A person can recognize your pain and still protect their comfort. A person can know exactly what they are doing and still act confused, because confusion gives them time, distance, and control. That possibility is difficult to face because it changes the entire question. Instead of asking how you can explain it better, you begin asking what their misunderstanding accomplishes. Instead of analyzing your delivery, you begin noticing the pattern that follows every attempt at honesty. The pattern is often predictable. You bring up a wound. They focus on your tone. You soften your tone. They question the timing. You choose a better time. They say the past should stay in the past. You limit yourself to the present. They say you are making a big deal out of nothing. You provide examples. They say you are keeping score. So you stop providing examples, and now they say they do not know what you are talking about. The target keeps moving because resolution was never the target. Your exhaustion is the target. Silence is the target. The moment you doubt yourself enough to stop asking is the target. This is why you leave conversations feeling foggy. You entered with a clear point and left defending your character. You entered asking for repair and left apologizing for the way you asked. You entered trying to protect the relationship and left wondering whether your needs are the thing destroying it. Stay with this, because what comes next changes everything. Your brain is not neutral during these conversations. The anterior cingulate cortex is involved in processing social pain and conflict. In plain English, rejection and emotional invalidation do not register as abstract ideas. They register as distress. Your brain treats disconnection as something urgent enough to solve, especially when the relationship has become a major source of emotional safety and threat at the same time. That is why you cannot simply let the conversation go. Your system is trying to reduce pain. Your mind believes clarity will bring relief. Your body believes understanding will bring closeness. But when the other person responds with distance, ambiguity, or reversal, the distress grows. You explain more because the original explanation did not calm the threat response. The explanation becomes a regulation attempt. Each new paragraph is a nervous system reaching for a door that keeps disappearing. Then intermittent reinforcement deepens the pattern. Behavioral psychology uses intermittent reinforcement to describe rewards delivered unpredictably rather than consistently. In plain English, the occasional moment of warmth can create stronger pursuit than steady affection. When they sometimes apologize, sometimes become tender, sometimes admit you were right, your brain learns to keep trying because the reward feels possible. The next explanation might work. The next message might reach them. The next vulnerable conversation might bring back the version of them you remember. That uncertainty is powerful. Wolfram Schultz's work on reward prediction error helps explain why. Dopamine activity is influenced not only by reward, but by the gap between what you expect and what happens. In plain English, unpredictable outcomes can keep your attention locked in place. You are not only attached to the person, you are attached to the possibility that this time the response will be different. This is why a small apology can carry enormous weight. It does not repair the pattern. It resets your hope. You may spend weeks surviving emotional drought because one sincere moment convinced you that deeper understanding is still within reach. You may interpret one vulnerable conversation as proof that the relationship is finally changing. You may keep explaining because you have seen flashes of the response you need, and your nervous system keeps chasing consistency from someone who only offers exceptions. This is not the same as love. Longing is not the same as safety. Emotional intensity is not the same as intimacy. And being deeply affected by someone is not evidence that they are capable of meeting you deeply. The painful truth is that you may feel closest to them when you are trying to repair what they broke. Conflict creates focus. Distance creates pursuit. Their silence makes you emotionally present. Their withdrawal makes you articulate. Their coldness makes you work harder to create warmth. You call it communication. But your body may be using communication as a survival ritual. The ritual has rules. Do not be too angry. Do not ask for too much. Do not sound accusing. Do not make them feel trapped. Do not leave anything unexplained. Do not stop until they understand. And because the rules feel moral, you do not notice how much they cost you. You believe you are being mature. You believe you are fighting for the relationship. You believe that walking away from the conversation would make you avoidant, unkind, or emotionally irresponsible. But here is the distinction that changes the frame. Repair requires two nervous systems. Over-explaining is what happens when one nervous system is forced to perform the work of both. You are trying to regulate your pain, their defensiveness, the future of the relationship, and the meaning of the past in a single conversation. You are carrying your own wound while protecting them from the discomfort of seeing it. You are doing the emotional labor of the person who was hurt and the emotional labor of the person being confronted. No wonder you are tired. No wonder your chest tightens when the message goes unanswered. No wonder you reread your own words, searching for the sentence that caused the withdrawal. You think you are looking for a mistake. You are looking for control. Hypervigilance is the state of constantly scanning for danger. In plain English, your nervous system keeps searching for subtle signals because subtle signals once mattered. You notice punctuation changes, response time, facial shifts, changes in affection, and the quiet that enters a room before someone says anything. This sensitivity is not imaginary. Nalini Ambadi's research on thin-slice judgments showed that people can form surprisingly accurate impressions from brief observations. In plain English, human beings often detect relational signals quickly. Your perception may be sharp. The problem begins when every signal becomes your responsibility to decode, repair, and neutralize. Your awareness becomes a job. You stop asking whether the relationship feels good. You ask what mood they are in. You stop asking whether your needs are being met. You ask what words will keep them from leaving. You stop asking whether the conversation is reciprocal. You ask how to make yourself easier to hear. You shrink the question until the only person under examination is you. That is how emotional imbalance becomes invisible. You keep refining your delivery while the deeper pattern stays untouched. The part most people never reach is coming. There is a reason being misunderstood can hurt you more than being mistreated. Mistreatment is painful, but misunderstanding attacks your reality. When someone repeatedly reframes your pain as oversensitivity, drama, neediness, or poor timing, you do not only feel hurt, you begin to feel unreliable. You begin to question the internal compass that warned you something was wrong. That confusion can become addictive in its own way, not because you enjoy it, because you need relief from it. The more they deny your experience, the more urgently you want them to validate it. The person who destabilized your reality becomes the person you ask to restore it. The person who created the question becomes the person you trust to provide the answer. That is the trap. You are asking the source of the confusion to become the source of clarity. Trauma bonding is often discussed as attachment formed through cycles of harm and relief. In plain English, the nervous system can become deeply attached when distress is repeatedly followed by moments of reconnection. The relief feels profound because the pain was profound. You may mistake the relief for evidence that the bond is uniquely deep. But relief is not repair. Relief is the temporary end of tension. Repair changes the pattern that created the tension. If every conversation ends with a brief moment of closeness followed by the same wound weeks later, you are not witnessing transformation. You are witnessing a reset. The relationship returns to baseline, and baseline is the problem. This is where childhood returns quietly. Maybe you were the child who could sense the room before entering it. Maybe you knew which version of the parent was home by the sound of a cupboard closing. Maybe you learned when to speak and when to disappear. Maybe you learned that harmony depended on your ability to read everyone else before anyone had to read you. That child did not become perceptive by accident. That child became perceptive because perception was protection. They learned to notice small changes before those changes became consequences. They learned to explain quickly before they were blamed. They learned to apologize early before the room became colder. They learned to translate pain into language adults would accept. That was intelligent. That was survival. But the adult cost is severe. Now you may feel safest in relationships where you are needed to interpret, repair, soothe, and clarify. A calm relationship can feel unfamiliar. A straightforward apology can make you suspicious. A person who listens the first time can feel almost unreal because your nervous system expects understanding to require labor. You are not drawn to pain because you want pain. You are drawn to roles you know how to perform. You know how to earn closeness. You know how to monitor distance. You know how to turn confusion into a project. You know how to work for the emotional response that should have arrived freely. This is not damage. This is an adaptation with a history. And history can become identity when nobody names it. You may call yourself compassionate. You are compassionate. You may call yourself patient. You are patient. You may call yourself someone who does not give up easily. You do not. But those strengths can become hiding places when they stop serving mutual connection and begin serving emotional survival. Your empathy can keep you trapped inside the explanation for someone else's behavior while your own experience waits outside the room. You understand their childhood. You understand their triggers. You understand their fear of vulnerability. You understand why closeness overwhelms them. You understand how their last relationship wounded them. You understand why confrontation makes them shut down. And slowly, understanding becomes the reason nothing has to change. You become fluent in the language of their pain and illiterate in the language of your limit. That is the hardest truth. Sometimes, your ability to understand them is the very thing that prevents you from fully seeing what the relationship is doing to you. But there is another layer. The person who does not listen may not always be intentionally cruel. Some people use deactivating strategies, a term from attachment research describing ways of suppressing closeness needs and distancing from emotional intensity. In plain English, they may minimize, withdraw, intellectualize, or focus on technical details because emotional accountability feels threatening. That explains the behavior. It does not make the behavior safe. Explanation is not the same as permission. Compassion is not the same as continued access. You can understand why someone shuts down and still recognize that their shutdown leaves you alone inside every important conversation. You can understand why they fear conflict and still name the cost of being forced to carry conflict by yourself. You can recognize their wounds without making your life the treatment center for them. This is where many people become stuck. You do not want to be unfair. You know they have pain too. You know they may not have learned how to communicate. You know they may love you in the only way they know how. So you keep translating your needs into smaller words. You lower the volume until your truth is almost silent. You call it patience. But patience without reciprocity becomes self-erasure, and the body keeps score. The HPA axis is the system that coordinates your stress response through hormones such as cortisol. In plain English, repeated relational uncertainty can keep your body braced for the next shift, even when there is no active argument. Part of you may remain prepared for one. You wake up rehearsing conversations. You check your phone with a sinking feeling. You feel a surge of relief when their name appears. You feel ashamed of how much relief you feel. You tell yourself not to care so much. Then you care more, because now you are fighting yourself and the relationship at the same time. This is not drama. This is cortisol meeting uncertainty. This is a body trained to wait for emotional weather. And your body may be exhausted from living in a climate you keep calling a phase. The most dangerous misunderstanding is believing that closure requires their participation. It often feels that way because your nervous system learned to associate relief with their response. When they are warm, you relax. When they explain, you breathe. When they apologize, your body finally leaves the battlefield. But if your peace depends on the person who destabilizes it, peace will always remain conditional. That is not closeness. That is captivity with moments of tenderness. The sentence you keep trying to write is not only for them, it is for the younger version of you who still believes pain must be presented perfectly before it deserves care. It is for the child who learned that being clear, calm, useful, and emotionally intelligent might finally make someone stay present. It is for the part of you that still confuses being understood with being worthy. You were worthy before the explanation. You were worthy during the silence. You were worthy when they misunderstood you. You were worthy when you had no evidence, no perfect wording, and no energy left to defend yourself. This is not a motivational statement. It is a correction. Your pain did not become legitimate when you explained it well. It was legitimate when it happened. Stay with this, because the final shift is the one your body has resisted the longest. There is a difference between being heard and being free. Being heard is the response you wanted from them. Being free is no longer needing their response to confirm what you already know. This does not mean your grief disappears. It means your grief becomes honest. You stop grieving the latest conversation and begin grieving the pattern. You stop asking why they did not understand the paragraph and begin acknowledging how many years you spent making yourself understandable to someone who rarely became more responsive. You stop treating each failure as an isolated communication problem and begin seeing the system. The system was never missing information. It was missing reciprocity. That is why adding more explanation could not solve it. Neuroplasticity is the brain's capacity to change through repeated experience. In plain English, your nervous system can learn new expectations when you stop reinforcing old ones. Each time you recognize that confusion does not require pursuit, you interrupt the ritual. Each time you allow your perception to stand without presenting a courtroom argument, you weaken the old association between love and labor. This is not quick. It is not clean. The urge to explain may grow louder before it quiets. Behavioral psychology calls this an extinction burst. When a familiar strategy stops producing a reward, the behavior can intensify before it fades. In plain English, you may feel the strongest urge to send one more message precisely when you begin refusing the old cycle. Your body may interpret non-pursuit as danger because pursuit used to create temporary relief. The urge is not evidence that you should act. The urge is evidence that the pattern noticed you are leaving. This is why silence can feel unbearable at first. Not because silence is wrong, because silence removes the ritual that once gave you a sense of control. You may feel cruel. You may feel unfinished. You may feel as though you are withholding something necessary. But not every unfinished conversation is unfinished because you failed to explain. Some conversations are unfinished because the other person was never willing to enter them honestly. That is not your failure. That is information. You are allowed to trust information. You are allowed to stop auditioning for basic understanding. You are allowed to stop translating pain for someone who only listens for ways to avoid responsibility. You are allowed to stop presenting evidence to a person committed to reasonable doubt. This is not punishment. This is reality without negotiation. The child in you learned that connection could be preserved through exceptional effort. The adult in you may now be learning a harder truth. Connection that depends on exceptional effort is not the same as safety. A relationship can contain love and still require too much self-abandonment. A person can have good qualities and still be unable to meet you where your life is happening. That distinction matters because your mind will search for reasons to return to the case. They had a hard week. They were raised differently. They were scared. They did not mean it that way. They care in other ways. Some of those things may be true, but truth does not cancel impact. Context does not erase repetition. Love does not make chronic misunderstanding harmless. And your empathy does not require you to remain available for the same wound in a different disguise. Earned secure attachment describes the possibility of developing greater relational security even when early experiences were inconsistent. In plain English, your past can shape your instincts without permanently determining your future. Security begins when your internal reality no longer has to win a debate before you respect it. You notice the tightening in your chest. You notice the urge to explain. You notice the familiar fantasy that the next sentence will finally unlock their empathy. And instead of treating the urge as an instruction, you treat it as a memory, a body memory, a relational memory, a younger strategy asking to be repeated. You do not shame it. You understand it. You thank it for keeping you connected when connection once depended on performance. Then you let the strategy remain in the past. This is how the loop closes. Not with the perfect message, not with the apology you waited years to hear, not with one final conversation where they suddenly understand every layer of what happened. The loop closes when your reality no longer requires their signature. You may still want them to understand. That is human. You may still wish they had been capable of meeting you in the place where you kept waiting. That is grief. But grief is not an instruction to return. Longing is not an instruction to explain. The ache is not proof that another paragraph is needed. Sometimes the ache is the sound of your nervous system releasing a job it was never meant to perform. You were not born to be the translator of someone else's emotional limitations. You were not born to make your pain convenient. You were not born to carry both sides of every conversation. You were not asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person to provide it. That is not shame. That is clarity, and clarity does not need permission.